Level training, getting ready to assess the Occupational Specialism Bitesize session. This session is going to focus on the Financial Compliance and Risk Analyst Occupational Specialism. The summer 2024 past paper for the Financial Compliance Risk Analyst Occupational Specialism for this training session. So if you would like to have a greater look at the exam paper as I'm talking you through the different assessments, the tasks and the mark schemes, now's the time to pause, go and access those materials from the website and have them available so that as we're walking through you can have a look at the greater depth. Because what we've used in this training session is a sample of the stimulus material that's provided in the tasks and within the mark schemes, and there is greater information that is available that you might want to utilise. Going through this, the different tasks within this session, we just want you to think about some things while you're doing it, such as what skills do you think learners are going to need to help them as they go through these different tasks or looking at the resource booklets? And how do you think you can help them develop the different skills and maybe knowledge that they need to be able to successfully attempt each of the tasks within this occupational specialism? As we can see on the screen, this is task 1 from the Financial Compliance Risk Analyst Occupational Specialism. As previously mentioned, this is a snippet of the task. There is a lot more information that is provided with the task. So if you have been able to go and access the 2024 summer paper from the website and are looking at that alongside this, you'll be able to see that there is more information. It's just easier to give you an overview here, because if we were trying to look at the whole thing in one go, it'd be quite overcrowded. So we'll start by looking then at the set task brief. So you can see here that students are going to be provided with a scenario, which in this instance is the Midsummer Retail Group PLC. It gives them some information about the business. And it also gives them some information about a recent experience, what's happened, what the consequences were. So students will start their task by reading the scenario and any other stimulus material. And then you can see on the right here some of the tasks that the students will then be expected to undertake as a result. So if we look here and look at activity 1A, part 1, we can see that the first thing that students are going to be asked to do is create an email. Now, within this task, there are going to be points available or marks available for the written communication, the quality of written communication. So how the students are structuring their emails, is it appropriate for the audience, and are they using technical language? So it's very important that when you're preparing learners for their occupational specialism, that you really consider teaching them the structure of an email. So dear sir, dear madam, or dear, give them a name if there's not a name, how they're going to sign it off, whether they're going to use bullet points, headings, subheadings, if the paragraphing, all of those sorts of things, because there are 3 marks available here for that. Equally, what sort of technical language should they be using? Who's their audience? So is it really technical? Is it sort of non-technical, or a mix of the two? So all sorts of things that when you're preparing them in the class for these assessments are activities that you can do. Now, they're also going to be really useful for their work placements, because they often struggle with emails. It's not something that necessarily they may have had experience of, so it's really going to help in the workplace as well as with their occupational specialism. So looking specifically at the tasks then, we can see for activity 1A part 1, there's one task there, and then there's a development of the task. So they are being asked to identify 1 ethical dilemma, 1 conflict of interest, and 1 conduct, risk and culture issue from the scenario. So when you're teaching the students exam technique, it's going to be really useful for them to understand what the question is asking them to do, so that they're able to access all the available marks. So as we can see here, there are 3 marks. So it is likely that they are going to get a mark for each identification. So 1, 2, 3. And it might be useful when you're teaching them how to look at the stimulus material and start answering these questions if maybe they have different highlighters and they learn to highlight these different sort of one highlighter for ethical dilemma, one for conflict of interest, and then one for the risk and culture issue. It'll make it really easy for them to do that when they go into an exam. If you can't use highlighters, then potentially maybe they develop a key or a code, or they use sort of symbols to do the same thing. Now, then we look at the second part of this task, which is worth 9 marks, where they're being asked then to provide an in-depth review of the implication of the issues in that first bullet point. So in effect, we're looking at there, out of a total of 12, that potentially are going to have 4 marks per issue. So 1 mark for the identification, and then 3 marks for the in-depth review of what implication that is having. Now, students are going to obviously be expected to go back to the stimulus material and have a look and see what's happened as a result of those. So it's useful that you sort of go through that with them, look at how they can structure it, and then what they need to include to get the mark breakdown. There are other sort of tasks here. As you can see, we've got task 1, activity 1A, task 2, point 2. So here they're looking at providing, they've been given some more information. They're going to produce their presentation, and they've been asked to provide recommendations about how MRG Bank in this case should address the issues that we found, and then justify it. So they've got sort of 15 marks available for that there. So again, it's really important that they got their 1A right, because when they move into the second part of 1A, they're going to need that, and then that develops further. You can see then in the last part of task 1 down there, where they're being asked to record a video where they are sharing their presentation that they developed in 1A part 2. So they've got marks there available for presenting their recommendations verbally, and then using appropriate visualization and presentation techniques. So what that means is they're getting 6 marks for how the content they're sharing in their presentation. So have they covered those recommendations well? Have they highlighted the right key points? Are they using the right sort of technical language? Are they confidently sharing their information with their audience? And then those other 3 marks are addressing those digital skills that they need to be able to demonstrate within their occupational specialisms. So it might be things like, are they using the templates on their slide deck? So instead of just having a plain white slide, have they gone in, have they looked at the background, have they changed it? Is it consistent? Are they using appropriate fonts? So have they maybe used Open Sans because that's accessible to people? Have they used their speaker's notes? They've got information down the bottom. Have they used maybe slide transitions or appropriate pictures, or maybe appropriate screenshots, things like that in their presentation? So they're all important skills that they can develop in the classroom, and then obviously feed them into their occupational specialisms. Having looked at the task then, on the screen now you can see the mark scheme. So how the task that we've just considered in task 1 will be assessed. Now you can see in the first instance here, where we were talking about those identification of issues, they are the points based. So where you had to identify the 3 issues, and there were 3 marks. You can see from the mark scheme there on the top left that is a points based. So they get a mark for the ethical dilemma, a mark for the conflict, and then a mark for the risk and culture part. Now, as they move beyond that part of the task, we move into what we call levels-based marking. So here you can see that there are 3 bands for each of these, plus band 0. So band 0 means there's no rewardable material. Generally speaking, that will be that there's nothing being submitted, or maybe they've just put their name and a heading on the page. But anything where they've actually written something that is relevant to the task that they're doing, or the scenario, even if it's not necessarily correct or on track, or it meets the scenario, would potentially then hit into band 1. So you can see there with band 1, we're talking about limited detail, limited understanding, might have gaps, likely to be admissions, significant admissions in some places. So in that band 1, it's going to be very limited. It might be that they're making simple statements. It might be that the statements they're making are not necessarily related to the issue that they've sort of identified, but it's kind of they've done something that is rewardable. As you move then up into band 2, you can see that we're talking about a generally detailed or generally well structured. So it's heading more towards what you might call good. So they've got a good understanding or a generally detailed understanding of what's going on. There might be some gaps, but they're likely to be few, or they're not going to be those sort of significant gaps in there. So these are sort of your good responses, the middle of the road responses. And then if you get up into band 3, we're talking about the fully detailed understanding and the well structured responses. These are what you might potentially refer to as excellent or thorough or comprehensive, are also other words you could use. So when you're looking at these and you're sort of sharing with the students how they're going to be marked, you can share that sort of wording with them. You can say, okay, this is a limited response, this is a generally detailed response, or this is a thoroughly detailed response, and then they can see where that's fitting within the bands. Now, they're using that again equally for the structure of the email, so the quality of the written communication. So you can see there that band 1, there's some structure. It's appropriate, but it's probably quite limited. It might be one big long paragraph, or they might not have an introduction and an appropriate sign off, and the language is probably quite informal maybe. They're sort of writing it to themselves rather than writing it in a professional style. Moving up into band 2, that's going to be more appropriate. They've probably got a good introduction, a good sort of closing statements or sign-offs, and what they're doing in their email is well structured. But there might still be some sort of issues, or the technical language isn't quite fully appropriate for the audience that they're talking to. And then obviously up into that top mark band, you've got that really well structured email. These are the sorts of emails when you see them that you look at and you think, well, actually you could use that in the workplace with minimal changes to it. They are the ones that you can look at and go, actually they're really good. They're the sorts of things that we would be sending in the workplace. On the right there, you can see the mark grid for task 1B, and it works exactly the same. So up the top there, our marking guidance are things that could be included. So you might also see it referred to as indicative content. So these are the things that the examiner will be looking for when they are reviewing the presentations. And they're also really good to give to students so they know what's being looked for in their presentations. So you can see here that they're looking for visual aids. So they are looking for them to include tables, charts, graphs, images, or bullet points. They count towards those digital skills. They're also looking for different fonts and styles. So again, as we talked about, maybe using Open Sans or having different sizes fonts. So having a heading sized font and then a smaller font for the main body of the text to show that digital skills. Headings, transitions, all those sorts of things. And you can also see it's talking about fluency, confidence, and clarity of their tone of voice when talking. So it might be that you want to spend some time with students practicing their presentations, so they develop those. And again, as you can see down at the bottom there, it's going to be that levels-based marking again, exactly the same bands with exactly the same sort of wording. So you can see there in band 0, there'd be no presentation. Band 1, we're talking about somewhat effective communication. So they might have struggled to be heard clearly. So they might also have had sort of, they weren't using appropriate technical language. Maybe they were really quiet or really rushed, and it was difficult to keep up with. As you move into sort of band 2, where it's mostly effective, these are the good presentations, the ones that you're listening to, you can understand what they're saying, the student is fairly confident in what they're delivering, but maybe there's sort of one or two sort of errors in there, or maybe they sort of get to the middle and they struggle a little bit and then they pick up the confidence again. So it's this mostly effective communication. And then as you get there to that band 3, this is the highly effective communication. This is where we want those students to be aiming. They're confident, they know what they're talking about, they're speaking clearly, you can hear them, they're engaging with the audience rather than maybe just staring at their notes or staring at the boards. And that comes across then as an engaging presentation. Task 2 then. So again, you can see a snippet of task 2 from the summer 24 paper here. So again, much like the task 1, students are provided with the stimulus material. So you can see here it continues to be against the Midsummer Retail Group PLC, and they're then being provided with some factors that have the potential to impact the successful operation of the business. And then as you move over to the task, you can see that again, students are being asked to read the stimulus material and respond. So in this instance, they're being asked to write a formal report. So students are going to need to practice writing their reports, because as you can see here, they are getting 3 marks again for the structure of their report and the appropriateness of the language they're using for the audience, and are they using the right technical language. So as you can see here, the first thing that they're going to be asked to do in that report is they're going to be asked to identify 3 of the risk exposures that are in the scenario. So again, that's where that sort of key or the highlighters might come in if they're used to using those to identify. They've got to then provide this in-depth review and then provide recommendations and justify their recommendations. So it's a nice sort of build up of the work product, and it's very similar to what they'd be asked to do in the workplace if they were completing these sorts of tasks. So where you've got students who are out doing their placements at the same time as they're doing this, or they've been lucky and they've finished their placements by this point, they will have these skills, or hopefully will have developed these skills, so that they know how to structure reports. So when you come round to doing the task with them, you can focus on developing sort of the extraction, the reading and applying sort of skills. Now, it might be useful to start teaching these activities and these skills in year 1, or maybe if you're doing a transition T-level as well, back in the very first year. So teach them how to structure emails, to structure reports, to do presentations, because then they've got those skills and they're going to be really useful for them in the workplace. They're going to help them develop that confidence. And by this time when they're doing their occupational specialism, most of them will be looking at sort of their next step. So they'll be doing their interviews for apprenticeships or degree programs or all those sorts of things. So in addition to the occupational specialism, you've got those skills that they've then got for those wider employability skills. But back to task 2, when you're preparing them for this, it's going to be important to obviously look at that stimulus material, get them confident with what it's showing, in what order it's being sort of delivered, and how they can go through, read it and extract what they need, and then how they're going to apply it within the task. Now, the tasks stay fairly similar. They might change maybe a report for something else, but they're going to stay fairly consistent, so students can use these. But what will happen is each time that stimulus material is going to be different. So if you are doing formative assessment, so mocks, if you're doing sort of practice questions in class, all those sorts of things, it's going to be really useful to have those tasks maybe there, and go and get stimulus material from maybe case studies that are on the internet. Another good place to get case studies for this sort of activity is go and have a look at the A-level papers. Go and have a look at the GCSE papers, maybe go and see if there's anything relevant on a BTEC paper or other vocational qualifications. Might also be useful to maybe have a look at AAT, or any qualification that has these types of scenarios in, that you can then pop in, give them this task, and you can get them used to practicing it. As you can see again here, we've got a mix of the points-based marking and the levels-based marking for task 2. Again, this is a snippet of the full mark scheme. The full mark scheme is available on the website for you to have a look at. And it was just to show you that there will be this combination of, again, identification. They'll get a mark for each one of the issues they've identified. And then as they move into those subsequent tasks, it'll be back to those bands again of limited detail, generally detailed, and fully detailed. So what you're teaching them for task 1 in terms of exam practice in structuring their answers consistently flows through into these later tasks, and they're going to be assessed the same way with those bands. As we move into task 3, then you can see that there is a little bit more stimulus material here for students to access. So they're going to have to be confident with reading this. It might be that one of the skills you want to teach them is how to really read something and extract information, because sometimes they'll read it and there'll be so much under the pressure of an exam they might not necessarily pick out the key information. But again, with this one, they're going to be asked to identify 3 potential non-compliance issues. They're then going to have to give a review of the implications, so it's very similar to task 1 and task 2 as we've already seen. Provide recommendations and justify your recommendations. So if you break it down into those steps, it's almost identical to what they were doing in task 2, but this time they're going to be looking at non-compliance issues instead. And then again, obviously they're getting structured marks based on the structure of their report. So if you've taught them the exam technique for task 2, it automatically sort of follows through here, and all they're doing is they're swapping out one type of issue for another issue. So again, students come in, they sit down, they read the stimulus material here, they work out what their non-compliance issues are, and they follow the same structure for this one as you would have taught them to do for task 2 and task 1. So it's got that nice consistency there. And again, it's brilliant if you've got stimulus materials for your formative assessment, because then they get the practice of these as well. And they're also quite nice in that these tasks are fairly standalone, so you can pull them out as like exam questions or bell work. So you can give them one of these at the start of the lesson, and maybe you could just give them the stimulus material and ask them to identify the issues initially. And as you work through the year, you've got more, you can add in more of those steps and ask them to add more as they go through. Or if you wanted to do like a think, pair, share type activity, you could ask a student to identify the issues. They could then pass it to another student who gives the sort of the review of the implications, and then maybe another student makes the recommendations and another justifies the recommendations. So you could use it in that way, or you could ask sort of a student to write an answer and leave them anonymous. You could swap them around if you wanted to type them, and then what you could do is you could ask the students to almost be the examiner. So you could ask them to go back and mark the responses and provide feedback on what's missing. So there's lots of different ways that you can use these tasks to prepare students for their occupational specialisms. And again, just a quick snippet of the task 3 mark scheme. So you can see here, points based for the identification of the issues, and then it goes straight back into the banded levels based response for the sort of the justifications and the review of the impact. You can see at the top there we've got the indicative content. So when we're looking at indicative content, these are what the senior examiners think that students might produce having seen these tasks. Now with indicative content, they are generally going to be sort of best guess ideas of what we're going to see. And what you'll often see in these boxes are accept any other answer. So that means that if a student has come up with an answer that is not in the indicative content, but it is relevant to the task or the answer that they're being asked to do, that they will be awarded credit for that. So it's not that if they don't hit what's in that indicative content, that they won't achieve it. Now, there are going to be some instances where there are definitive answers. So maybe if they're doing finance on one of those tasks, you can only have one answer, in which case, if they don't get that, they're not going to be able to be rewarded and they have to follow that. But with these types of ones where you've got the indicative content there, and it could be that they've made all sorts of recommendations that aren't on the list, that the examiner does have. That's why they are sort of specialists, because they will have the knowledge to know whether that is relevant. And if it is relevant, then they can award the marks to the learner or the student. So please don't worry that if students aren't getting what's in the indicative content, if it's got that, as you can see here, sort of all answers must come from the scenario, but accept any other appropriate wording, then that's fine, and it would be covered under that sort of umbrella. Moving into task 4 then. So this one, there is a lot more stimulus material than you're seeing here. This is just a sort of an overview so you can get an idea. So as we move into task 4, you can see that we start to get some sort of numerical data appearing and some financial data appearing, and that students are going to start being asked to do tasks with that data. So they're still getting the stimulus material, they're just getting numerical as well as sort of written stimulus material now. And you can see down the bottom there, as we're looking at those tasks, they're being asked to check the data and identify errors. They're being asked to do calculations. They're being asked to compare things, comment on trends. So there's a lot of activities that they're being asked to do here. So what they're going to need to do in terms of exam technique here is they've got 2 hours and 45 minutes to get these tasks done. You can already see there's like 6 on this first task here, and then you've got a number of tasks over there, and I've only included part A1 for this, so there are going to be a lot of other tasks that they might have to do. So they are going to have to work on their time management for these. They need to be aware of how long they're going to have to do a calculation, and they're going to need to practice and practice and practice so that they can do these calculations quite quickly, to make sure that they have sufficient time to fully complete all of the different activities that they've got in these tasks. Because you can see down here, in addition to the calculations, they're also commenting on the performance, they might be commenting on trends, they might be making recommendations. So it's going to be maybe they need to work on how quickly they're going to have to do the calculations. Maybe it's you look at the points available and you say to them, okay, you've got this amount of time to do it, and then you've got to save this amount of time for the writing. It's a sort of a conversation that you're going to need to have, maybe amongst the team, maybe with your students if they're doing mocks and things, so that they understand roughly how long they've got and how quickly they're going to have to work, to make sure that they obviously can get all the way through it, and then they're going to achieve what they're capable of. Okay, so I've included a snippet of the task 4 mark scheme just because this is slightly different than what we've seen previously. Again, we do have the levels-based marking where they are maybe making recommendations or justifications, but we've also got this points-based marking where we're talking about if they're doing calculations. So here we've got error checking, we've got mean and standard deviation, we've also got some financial projection figures. And as you can see in the mark scheme, it not only will give the answers, but it will also then give marking guidance to the examiners. And it's really useful to share that with your students, because then they know what examiners are looking for. So there are likely to be some error carried forward marks if it is going to be a calculation, and then they have to rely on that calculation to do another calculation. So it's really important that you explain to students that where that's possible, that error carried forward, that they are making sure they have got every single stage of their calculation down. Because if the examiner can identify where the errors occurred, and there is error carried forward marks, then they're going to be able to award some of the marks rather than not being able to award any marks because there's no calculations. Equally, if they've put the information into the calculation correctly and then something's gone wrong between writing it down and them actually calculating it, and they put the wrong answer down, if the examiner can see they've got the right calculation written down, even if it is the wrong answer, they're going to maybe get 2 out of the 3 marks, because the examiner can see they understood what the process was, they've substituted those numbers incorrectly, they've just missed that last step. So it's really important that when you're looking at these finances, that students understand how they can pick up marks even if they don't quite get the right answer. And then we just moved into task 5, the last task on the occupational specialism. Again, they've got some stimulus material here, and now this is slightly different to the other scenarios that we've seen, so it's important that students are aware that they need to be prepared that sometimes the scenario is not going to be consistent across all 5 tasks. So whilst they might have used the same scenario for, say, task 1, 2, 3, that here in task 5, they're looking at entirely different business. They're in a different role with different information. So they've got to be conscious that they shouldn't be referring back to what they've done previously. In this particular instance, that they need to look at what's in front of them and they need to answer the questions based on that. So here you can see they're going to be asked to do another report, where again they're going to get those marks for the quality of their written communication. And then again, it's very similar to what we've seen before. 3 breaches, then the review, then the recommendations, then the justifications. So it's very similar, and it's using exactly the same mark scheme. I haven't included it here because we've seen it in multiple previous sort of slides. But obviously, if you want to look at the mark scheme, you can. It's all there. Another good place to go and have a look at information for the occupational specialism is go and have a look at the lead examiner reports. They are really detailed documents that are written every series, so annually in the case of the occupational specialism, that are there to provide feedback on the sorts of information that are in that they found. So you'll get stuff like how many students sat the occupational specialism, what the top and bottom achievement mark may have been, what the mean was, what students did well, what students didn't do so well, what misconceptions came up. There's also examples. Now, for this, it's slightly longer. It's not quite maybe what you're used to with exam papers where you get lots of shorter answers. These are the long answers. So actually, they will provide a full example of, say, task 5, and then there'll be a commentary from the lead examiner on what mark they gave and why. They're really useful in helping to support you to use alongside sort of the past papers, and they're available there for students. So if you've used it for formative assessment and you're giving them sort of feedback after they've done, say, their mocks, you can absolutely sort of give them that lead examiner report alongside so they can have a look and see what the lead examiner is saying they should have done. And then maybe you could use it as sort of a feed forward activity so they can go through and they can improve their own work using the mark scheme and the lead examiner report. So hopefully this has been a really useful overview on assessing the occupational specialism for finance and compliance and risk analyst.